November 8, 1942. The beaches of North Africa roared with the chaos of Operation Torch. Waves of American infantry splashed ashore, carrying rifles, grenades, and crates stamped with the word "secret." Inside those crates was something most of the men had never seen before. A strange steel tube, crude in appearance, but destined to change the very mathematics of armored warfare. It was the bazooka. No manuals, no training. Just a desperate hope that this untested weapon could stand against the tanks of enemy armies. In less than 2 years, it would terrify German crews, force new tactics, and transform the ordinary soldier into a tank hunter. This is the story of how a weapon born from scrap metal and a coat hanger reshaped the battlefields of World War II. And before we dive in, make sure you subscribe, because the most devastating weapons of history deserve to be remembered. The bazooka's story didn't begin on a battlefield, but in a scrap pile at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. It was May 6, 1942, and the U.S. Army was desperate for new anti-tank weapons. British designers had focused on massive spigot mortars weighing over 100 pounds and requiring entire crews to operate. These were cumbersome and clumsy, hardly the kind of weapon an infantryman could sling over his shoulder. Into this atmosphere of skepticism stepped Lieutenant Edward Ohl and Colonel Leslie Skinner, men tasked with presenting alternatives to a panel of doubtful generals. Ohl, resourceful and pressed for time, scavenged a steel tube from a junk heap that just happened to be the right diameter. For sights, he bent a wire coat hanger. He taped the contraption together in a crude but functional way, ready to gamble his career on an invention no one took seriously. When the demonstration began, the heavy British mortars failed spectacularly. From 150 yards, 5 fired at a moving M3 Stuart tank, and not a single round hit. Officers muttered, embarrassed, their hopes fading. Then came Ohl's turn. Fearing the backblast could be lethal, he strapped on a welder's mask, steadied the pipe against his shoulder, and fired. The rocket screamed from the tube and slammed directly into the tank's side. Reloading in seconds, Ohl fired again. Another hit. The generals, silent moments before, erupted in astonishment. General Barnes, Chief of Research and Engineering, laughed at the contraption's crude appearance, saying it looked like Bob Burns's Bazooka, a novelty musical instrument. The name stuck instantly, but more importantly, Barnes ordered 5,000 into immediate production. In the space of a single morning, what began as a scrap metal experiment had proven itself. The crude launcher had outperformed advanced European designs, and the U.S. Army had found its next great weapon. Within months, this steel tube would go from a joke to a mass-produced symbol of American ingenuity. Most weapons of World War II crawled through years of bureaucratic delay before reaching the battlefield. The bazooka was different. It leapt from prototype to mass production at unprecedented speed. General Electric and other contractors were ordered to begin manufacturing in the summer of 1942, and by October, 5,000 launchers per month were rolling off assembly lines. Each required only 20 pounds of steel, a few welds, and simple electrical wiring. The price tag, just $25 per launcher and $8 per rocket, made it one of the most cost-effective weapons of the entire war. The design was brutally simple. A seamless steel tube, 54 inches long, weighing just 13 pounds. Its rocket could pierce 4 inches of armor at 300 yards. Compared to the standard 37mm anti-tank gun, which required weeks of training and entire gun crews, the bazooka was revolutionary. Captain Franklin Johnson at Fort Benning later reported that an average soldier could be trained to use the weapon effectively in a single afternoon. For the first time, 2 infantrymen could carry a weapon capable of destroying a tank wherever their squad went. The psychological effect was immediate. Soldiers no longer faced tanks with hopeless terror. They had something small, portable, and deadly. For the cost of 1 Sherman tank, the U.S. Army could buy thousands of launchers and tens of thousands of rockets. In an industrial war where numbers mattered, the bazooka embodied American mass production at its finest. By the fall of 1942, crates of these strange steel tubes were loaded onto ships bound for North Africa. The men who would carry them had never fired one. Most had never even seen one outside of training manuals. But they were about to learn quickly, because their very first lesson would come under fire in the chaos of battle, on the beaches of Algeria. November 8, 1942. The beaches of Algeria erupted as Operation Torch began. For the first time, American infantry entered large-scale combat in World War II. Packed among their gear were crates stamped secret, filled with the brand-new rocket launchers. But in a twist that could have been disastrous, no one had been allowed to open them before the landings. The bazookas had arrived sealed, shrouded in secrecy so strict that even the men meant to use them had no idea how they worked. As bullets snapped overhead and shells exploded along the beaches, soldiers pried open the crates and pulled out the steel tubes. There were no manuals, no instructions, and no prior training. Men fiddled with wires, searched for firing switches, and tried to understand how the crude sights aligned. Worse, many of the rockets had been damaged by saltwater during the transatlantic crossing. Whole batches misfired, fizzled, or failed to ignite. In one report, the 509th Parachute Infantry noted that out of their first 20 rockets, only 7 actually worked. The weapon designed to give Americans confidence risked becoming a battlefield embarrassment. Yet even in this chaotic debut, there were flashes of brilliance. On November 10th, members of the 1st Armored Division logged the first official tank kills with the bazooka. 2 French Renaults knocked out near Port Lyautey. The impact was undeniable. When it worked, the launcher could stop armor in its tracks. Infantry, who had once been helpless against steel monsters, now saw hope in the hollow roar of the rocket. The debut in North Africa was a hard lesson. The weapon's potential was real, but its execution was still flawed. Damaged ammunition and untrained troops nearly doomed it before its legend began. But from those early shots, commanders understood that they had stumbled upon something revolutionary. The bazooka had blooded itself in combat, and bigger battles awaited. If Operation Torch introduced the bazooka to the battlefield, the Battle of Kasserine Pass brought it to the enemy. February 1943, Tunisia. Elements of Rommel's Afrika Korps smashed through inexperienced American lines. Amid the chaos, German troops overran positions and seized intact launchers along with crates of rockets. Within days, these weapons were shipped back to Germany for study. When engineers examined the strange steel tubes, they were stunned. Here was a weapon unlike the heavy anti-tank rifles and cumbersome guns they had relied on. Lightweight, simple, cheap, and devastatingly effective. It represented a new kind of warfare. German reports praised its portability, its minimal production needs, and its armor penetration at ranges up to 150 meters. They recognized instantly that the bazooka could change infantry combat. The Reich wasted no time. By March 1943, designs for a scaled-up version were underway. Their solution was to enlarge the warhead to 88 millimeters, borrowing from their existing artillery shells. The result was the Raketen-Panzerbüchse, quickly nicknamed the Panzerschreck, the tank terror. By September, the first models rolled off German production lines. For American commanders, The capture was a sobering reminder. Weapons that had been rushed to the front to save their infantry were now being studied and copied by their enemies. In a war where innovation moved at lightning speed, the bazooka had become a double-edged sword. It gave U.S. soldiers a fighting chance against armor, but it also armed the Wehrmacht with the blueprint for its own rocket weapons. The irony was stark. A weapon designed to level the playing field against German tanks would soon return in the hands of German infantry, deadlier than before. As the fighting shifted to Sicily and Italy, both sides would carry rocket launchers into battle. The age of the tank's dominance was ending, not because of other tanks, but because of infantry armed with steel tubes. By July 1943, the Allies turned their eyes toward Europe itself. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, would be the bazooka's true trial by fire against German armor. This time, American forces carried the improved M1A1 model, with more reliable rockets and sturdier construction. Unlike in North Africa, soldiers now had at least some training. They were no longer fumbling in the dark with mysterious tubes. They were prepared to hunt tanks. It was here that the bazooka earned its reputation. At Biscari, paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne achieved one of the most legendary shots of the war. Under withering fire, a bazooka team took aim at a Tiger tank, one of Germany's most feared weapons. The rocket streaked forward and struck directly through the driver's vision slit, one of the few vulnerable points on the beast. The Tiger shuddered, halted, and was abandoned. The improbable shot became a story whispered among soldiers, proof that even the strongest armor was not invincible. German war diaries from Sicily revealed the shock these weapons caused. For the first time, enemy reports admitted that Allied infantry carried rockets capable of destroying tanks at 100 to 150 meters. 17 German tanks fell to bazooka fire during the Sicilian campaign alone. But perhaps more important than the kills was the change in morale. Colonel James Gavin of the 505 Parachute Infantry wrote that the bazooka gave his men something priceless: confidence. The crippling terror of tank panic began to fade. Where once infantry had scattered at the sight of advancing panzers, they now dug in and prepared to fight. A cheap steel tube, weighing only 13 pounds, had shifted the psychology of the battlefield. Blitzkrieg relied on fear as much as firepower. And in Sicily, that fear began to vanish. As the fighting moved into Italy, the bazooka evolved from a specialized anti-tank tool into a universal weapon. Soldiers quickly discovered that the shaped charge warhead was just as effective against bunkers, machine gun nests, and fortified stone walls as it was against tanks. The bazooka wasn't just a tank killer, it was a key to breaking static defenses. In the bloody street fighting at Ortona, Canadian troops pioneered new tactics. Instead of charging down roads covered by snipers and machine guns, they used bazookas to blast holes through the thick stone walls of buildings. Squads moved from house to house by blowing openings and bypassing streets entirely. It was dangerous, exhausting work, but it saved lives and turned the bazooka into an indispensable urban weapon. By early 1944, every U.S. infantry battalion carried at least 24 launchers. They weren't limited to anti-armor squads anymore. They were spread across platoons and companies, ready to be used at a moment's notice. German commanders quickly realized the threat. Orders were issued that tanks could no longer advance into towns without infantry screens. Crews were warned never to approach buildings within 100 meters unless cleared. In desperation, panzer units welded spare track links, sandbags, and even poured concrete onto their hulls, trying to blunt the rockets. But improvisation had limits. Armor that once inspired dread was now forced to power behind infantry. A weapon born from scrap metal and tape was rewriting the doctrine of one of the world's most feared armies. By the time Allied soldiers looked toward the beaches of Normandy, the bazooka was no longer a secret. It was a staple of every squad, a weapon as standard as the rifle or the machine gun. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Thousands of bazooka teams stormed ashore alongside rifles, grenades, and machine guns. Unlike in North Africa, these men had trained with the weapon, drilled on its quirks, and understood its potential. On the beaches of Normandy, it wasn't just tanks they faced, but bunkers, pillboxes, and fortified walls. Bazooka crews blasted openings in German defenses, clearing paths for infantry to advance off the sand. But the true test came inland, in the tangled hedgerows of Normandy. The ancient earthworks created natural fortresses. German tanks and machine guns lurked behind walls of dirt and brush, striking unseen and retreating before counterattacks could land. In this nightmarish terrain, the bazooka became indispensable. Infantry units carried them at all times, blasting openings in hedgerows and ambushing panzers at point-blank range. Official U.S. records credit bazookas with destroying 12% of all German tanks lost in the American sector during the first 6 weeks after D-Day. Yet the raw numbers tell only part of the story. German war diaries describe crews abandoning vehicles when bazooka teams were merely rumored nearby. The weapon's psychological power rivaled its explosive force. Infantry who had once scattered at the sight of tanks now stalked them through hedgerows, waiting for a shot. By midsummer, the once invincible aura of German armor was gone. A 19-year-old private, armed with an $8 rocket, could cripple a tank costing tens of thousands of Reichsmarks. Blitzkrieg had always depended on speed and fear, but in Normandy, both were broken. The bazooka gave infantry the confidence to stand their ground, and with it, the ability to choke German armor in the bocage. As 1944 turned to winter, the Allies braced for the unexpected German counterattack that would become the Battle of the Bulge. Bitter cold swept across the Ardennes. Snow blanketed the forests, and temperatures froze equipment. Bazooka crews found their batteries sluggish and propellants unreliable. Rockets misfired, sometimes refusing to ignite altogether. Soldiers learned to keep them warm under their coats, pulling them out only at the last second when tanks approached. Even in these brutal conditions, the bazooka left its mark. Nearly 90 German armored vehicles were destroyed or disabled by rocket teams during the campaign. One sergeant recorded a remarkable hit, striking a Panther's engine deck from 75 yards and forcing the crew to abandon it. These weren't just tank kills, they were acts of survival in desperate battles where every weapon counted. The bazooka's versatility also inspired innovation. Major Charles Carpenter, a U.S. Army observation pilot, became legendary as Bazooka Charlie. Flying a tiny L-4 Grasshopper plane, Carpenter strapped 6 bazookas under his wings. Against all odds, he used the improvised flying tank killer to destroy German armor, trucks, and even armored cars. His exploits turned the humble launcher into a symbol of daring ingenuity. The winter battles revealed something deeper. The bazooka was more than a tool. It was a mindset. Soldiers no longer viewed tanks as unstoppable. They believed they could fight back, whether from the frozen ground of the Ardennes or the skies above France. In a war where morale often mattered as much as firepower, the steel tube had become a symbol of resistance. By the start of 1945, the bazooka wasn't just a weapon. It was part of the Allied identity. From beaches to hedgerows, from snow-covered forests to cockpit wings, It had proven that even the simplest invention could alter the fate of entire campaigns. By the time the Third Reich collapsed in May 1945, the bazooka had secured its place as one of the most influential weapons of World War II. Nearly 500,000 launchers and more than 15 million rockets had been produced. For the cost of a single Sherman tank, the U.S. Army could buy thousands of launchers and tens of thousands of rockets. Proof that sometimes quantity and simplicity could triumph over engineering marvels. German commanders wrote bitterly in their post-war reports that the rocket launcher had stripped tanks of their independence. No longer could armor drive into towns without infantry screens. No longer could blitzkrieg roll forward unchecked. Every hedgerow, every window, every pile of rubble might hide a bazooka team. Its legacy stretched far beyond Europe. In the Pacific, Marines fired thousands of rockets into Japanese bunkers and cave systems. At Iwo Jima alone, nearly 2,000 bazooka rounds were expended in clearing fortifications. After 1945, the principle spread worldwide. The Soviets copied the design in their RPG-2 and later the RPG-7. The British developed their LAW series. Sweden refined the concept into the Carl Gustaf. The basic idea, a lightweight, man-portable rocket capable of piercing armor, became a permanent fixture in modern warfare. But perhaps the bazooka's greatest contribution wasn't measured in tanks destroyed or bunkers breached. It was psychological. Before its arrival, infantry felt helpless against armor. A tank rolling toward a foxhole was a death sentence. After the bazooka, that equation changed. A 19-year-old private, carrying a steel tube and a handful of rockets, could turn the tide of a battle. Confidence replaced panic. The balance of power shifted from machines to men. Born from scrap metal and a coat hanger, the bazooka rewrote the rules of modern war. It was proof that simplicity, speed of production, and faith in ordinary soldiers could overcome even the most formidable enemies. And in doing so, it transformed the battlefield forever.